The moon brings the woman to the man, capisci?
The moon is a little like love.
Will you marry me?
I will marry you. I will be your wife.
You love him, Loretta?
No.
Good. When you love him, they drive you crazy.
Sometimes
Why are you marrying Johnny? He's a fool.
it makes you act a little crazy.
Where are you taking me?
To the bed.
Oh, God. Okay, I don't care. Take me to the bed.
Isn't it romantic?
You got a love bite on your neck. Your life's going down the toilet.
You'll have your eyes open for you, my friend.
I have my eyes open.
I'll say no more.
You haven't said anything.
Ah, che bella luna.
You ruined my life.
That's impossible. You ruined my life.
Look, it's Cosmo's moon.
Why do men chase women?
Nerves? I don't want to talk about it.
That moon, that crazy moon.
Now you talk.
I love you.
What?
Snap out of it.
I'm confused.
They say there's nothing new under the sun.
Wait a minute.
But under the moon, that's another story.
Do you love him, Loretta? No, I love him awful. Oh, God, that's too bad.
Cher, Nicolas-Cage, in a Norman Jewison film.
Alla famiglia,
Moonstruck.
Welcome to the Cage Corner podcast, a podcast journey through the great Nicolas Cage. I am your host, Captain Nostalgia, and if you guys are new to our show is just slightly a little bit different than other Nicolas Cage podcasts out there. First off, this is a spin-off show from Victims and Villains, a podcast that dares to marry mental health and pop culture, and all of the movies that we cover on this are chosen by our fine patrons at our $5 tier. So if you guys would like to help us get mental health resources into schools and conventions, you guys can and also tell us which Nicolas Cage movie you guys want us to cover. Go to patreon.com/victims and villains. But all of that is going to be in the show notes wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this. But this is the episode we're covering, 1987's Moonstruck, and I am joined by staff writer and playwright Mr. Matthew Basil.
Thank you for having me back again. I am usually always down to talk about movies, but I am always down to talk about Nicolas Cage movies.
So when we started this, doing this $5 tier, it started out as a complete joke. I was like, nobody will ever pay. I was like, hopefully, but I don't think anyone will. Then, we put out the first episode, the pilot with Grand Isle, and we got, I think it was three back to back patrons that came on and started supporting us at that tier, and I was like, oh, okay. Cool. I thank you so much for agreeing with our vision and supporting us. But this was a movie that is early Nicolas Cage, early Nicolas Cage, and
one of his first big ones. I think it was the same year Raising Arizona came out, actually. So it was kind of right as he was starting to really make a name for himself.
So he had some bit works in early 80s movies. There was a couple Rat Pack movies that he had done around that time. But this was kind of one of the first movies where he started stepping out and really making a name for himself. And
funny trivia, the studio didn't want him for the movie. They were going to go with somebody else, and Cher insisted that he be in it. She felt that he could play crazy the best. And he delivered, in my opinion. And she said she would leave the film if they didn't cast him as opposite her.
Wow, that's some truly some big shoes to put in front of Nicolas Cage. And I think it was last month one of the patrons had chosen us to cover Vampire's Kiss, and our friends over at You Have to Watch This podcast graciously covered that. So thank you, Alan and Devin. But this was kind of like right around the same time where like Nicolas Cage was kind of like really starting to like make a crazy name for himself, and now we know him as we did Ghost Rider this month too, and now we know him as kind of like we wait for those moments where you just kind of see him like lose his mind.
Yeah, I forget where I was watching it, but someone on the internet put it as when we get to see Nick Cage.
That's such an accurate description though, because I found myself the first time I watched Mandy, I was waiting for that, like that Nick Cage moment. And when someone close to him dies, he's in a bathroom in a raglan and like whitey tighties with a 40 and just going crazy. But it works. Like if he's given the hands of like the right directors, like Nicolas Cage crazy is cinematic gold.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It is. And I think this was one of those cases where, like you said, it worked. Cher was absolutely right that he was the right man for the job.
So I want to ask, and I want to get your opinion on this because, you know, obviously movies are made up of people from like different backgrounds. Sometimes you have stage actors that cross over into movies. You have television that come into movies. You have wrestlers that have obviously made a name for themselves. John Cena, The Rock. But it's always interesting when pop stars kind of make that transition. And like, how do you feel about like pop stars kind of like coming into the silver screen?
I mean, it rarely works, I think, in all honesty. I mean, sometimes it does. There are instances where it does. You know, sometimes the pop star does like one role really good and maybe doesn't, you know, really have any other movies that fit, you know, them. It's just always a little bit, you know, because it's two different talents. Not saying that, you know, people can't have more than one talent, but I mean, it's one talent to be a singer and a performer, you know, on stage with music, and then, you know, another talent to, you know, act. So, you know, I always, you know, I'm a little bit hesitant, but honestly, I mean, it has Lady Gaga, for instance, in A Star Is Born. I thought she did a phenomenal job. You know, if you asked me before I saw that movie, you know, what I thought, you know, about, I would have said, nah, it's not going to work. But I really was blown away by her performance in that movie. So, you know, you never can know for sure. And I think this is, again, another example where, you know, Cher has made a name for herself as an actress. You know, and this is definitely one of those movies where she shows she can do it.
So I'm right there with you. I often think that, you know, music, it takes talent. Like I understand and know that it takes talent to be a musician.
By any means.
But I think that you just captured it perfectly when you're saying that like not everybody can act. And like recently on Victims, we were talking about Chef, and somehow along the way, like there's an element of that movie that features a road trip. And so we got talking about Britney Spears' one single credit to her name in Crossroads 2002. Mariah Carey, like doing Glitter, Redman, who's, you know, not a pop star, but he's a rapper, having him do Seed of Chucky in the early 2000s, Busta Rhymes and Halloween Resurrection. And we went through this like really weird period in like the late 90s, early 2000s where we're just like, give all the pop stars and rappers movies.
Yeah.
Just do it. And those movies either were not received well by critics, fans, or do not hold up well at all. And I think that like Lady Gaga is a great example of like that anomaly when you're talking about pop stars transitioning, because she did it first with American Horror Story and did really well. And then just like seeing her on The Star Is Born, like was just like another level. Like I did like, that's not normally my cup of tea as far as movies go, but like that movie just like awed me Like,
yeah, I mean, the friend I saw with, both of us went back home after seeing the movie together, and I mean, we both were saying we were listening to songs from that movie, like just completely could not get it out of our heads for at least like 24 hours. That's how amazing both her and Bradley Cooper did with that film.
and I don't know, like, what's like more impactful, like the fact of like Bradley Cooper doing country music, a genre I don't typically listen to, or Lady Gaga doing acting, but the two of them just together was really well. And Bradley Cooper kind of had that same experience that Cher did, where he was like, it needs to be Gaga. Like, this is who I want to have as my co-star. And I think it's really bold of Cher to basically, like, agree to walk if they didn't cast Nicolas Cage, because their chemistry between the two of them, I feel like, is really what sells me on this. And I'm not Italian, but the way that their love story starts is a way that we've seen Italian love stories portrayed in cinema for quite some time. And the two of them together, like, it was just so good. And I really, really loved the two of them together. Like, they're so charming, and them at the center of this movie, I think, is just really, really well casted. And I'm glad that Cher kind of stuck her neck out for Cage to get this role.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I couldn't envision, anybody else doing it. I think, like you said, they have really good chemistry together, which, I mean, again, I wouldn't have guessed it, when before seeing it, but they do. It works, and I think it ends up being the backbone of the movie in a lot of ways, because there's so much kind of, it's a comedy, so there's kind of this kooky, Italian, kind of, family kind of going around it, and I think, without that, because, you believe in that relationship, you kind of go along with everything that's going on around it, and the absurdity that everyone's showing up to the breakfast table at the end of the movie, and it's kind of grounds the movie, because you kind of believe that these two people could fall in love.
Yeah, so I guess, like, before we start talking about, like, the thematic elements that make up this movie, like, what were your general thoughts on it? This was a first viewing for me, and, like, when we reached the end, because I watched it with my wife, and I just remember, like, turning to my wife and said, I feel like this movie was, like, infinity times better than what I was anticipating. Like, this movie had no right to be as good as it did, and it was so spectacular.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's because, as we were saying right before we actually start broadcasting, recording, I had watched it about a year ago for the first time, and going in with low expectations, honestly, and was really impressed, and actually just was watching some clips before we came on tonight just to refresh my memory, and was like, wow, I forgot how good this movie is. I gotta watch it again this weekend or something, because it comes, like I said, it could have just been kind of a screwball, kind of quirky, just, New York movie. But I think, like I said, there's Cher and Nicolas Cage, their performances, their chemistry just elevated to, a really heartfelt story. I will say also too that John Mahoney and Olympia Dukakis, their roles to me also really pulled me in. Their characters. And I think, like I said, those elements kind of elevated, so it mixes with the comedy, and you get this kind of very heartfelt story that has a lot to, a lot to say as well, in it. So it's kind of a really enjoyable movie, and it's light and it's funny, but it's also kind of really endearing, and, really kind of makes you want to fall in love, or reminds you why you fell in love if you are currently in love. So I think that's, a testament to the actors that pulled it together. Not that the writing, was anything wrong with the writing, but I think, the actors are really what elevated it.
So there's a particular scene where everyone, like, there's like multiple characters all looking up at the same moon. Mm-hmm. And one of them's like an older guy, and if I remember correctly, I think it was Olivia Dukakis's brother. And
I was never quite sure of their relation, but yeah, I know you're talking. It's the one that sure character Loretta works for, right?
Yeah. So she balances the books, and like everyone's kind of like all connected,
right?
But there's a scene where like he looks at his wife, in the moonlight, and like just compliments her, and they kind of like insinuate that like this elderly couple like went on to eventually have sex,
right?
And but it's kind of like one of those things that like I turned to my wife and I was like, I'm gonna be that way when I'm like old and wrinkly, just so you know. And but it's like one of like the more endearing qualities about this movie that I just absolutely fell in love with. And one of the things that I think for our generation, you know, when you're talking about these kind of like family movies that, you know, maybe aren't necessarily outright like made for families, but like have a strong family dynamic. We saw My Big Fat Greek Wedding is a great example of kind of that kind of intensity and that intimacy that Moonstruck brings. And then, you know, you even see it like it's a completely different genre and movie, but Godfather is another great example that really kind of illustrates the depth and the intimacy of family that especially for Italians, that this movie does in a more lighthearted way. And I feel like the family dynamic that is woven throughout the tapestry of this movie is phenomenal. This movie just made me feel like I was just like living in a 2-hour Olive Garden commercial, and I just felt so warm after I got done this movie.
Well, I know you said you're not Italian, but I am Italian, and I can tell you that it's pretty accurately done from my own experience. So yeah, they and which is I don't think either the director Norman Jewison and the writer John Patrick Shanley. I don't know if either one of them are Italian or not. I couldn't find that out, but. They capture it beautifully. It's how, you know, I remember, you know, growing up, this, you know, just this, you know, everybody's close knit. There's these emotions that are going under kind of the surface there. And, you know, just a phrase or a word carries so much weight, you know, that you catch in this movie when the different family members are talking with one another. And it's just the energy that they have. And it's very accurate, and but it does it in a way, whereas My Big Fat Greek Wedding, I think was the kind of tease it, you know, and make fun of it a little bit. This does it in a way where you almost feel like you're in the family. You're part of the eccentricity, and you know, you're like, oh yeah, okay, this is just how we are. So for me at least, it pulled me in even more so, where I just felt a part of this family. Like, oh, okay, yeah, I want to go have, you know, I want to go live with them and, you know, hang out with them and, you know, go to dinner and have awkward conversations with them. This is awesome.
Yeah. And so you even see that in, I guess this is an app. We've gotten pretty deep into this movie already, but spoiler warning, because I'm about to give a major spoiler about the ending, but particularly you see that family dynamic at the end when this affair between Loretta and Ronnie actually culminates in this family breakfast over oatmeal, of all things.
Yeah.
And Johnny is Ronnie's brother and Loretta's fiance, and like they break up at the beginning of this breakfast, and then Ronnie proposes to Loretta and they get engaged, and they're all like having these like celebratory like champagne, and Johnny's just kind of in the corner, and I guess it was like the brother of the grandfather like walked over and he like hands him a glass and he's like, cheer up, Sonny, you're in the family now. And like that, I feel like just kind of captures that scene in particular, just captures that family dynamic so well that it's such a warm note to end on.
Yeah, now a little trivia about that scene. I looked up trivia. That was the director, Norman Jewison, actually got fined because he wouldn't let the actors go to take their lunch break because he was so intensely working on that they went into like overtime because he wanted to get everybody's placement right for that final scene at breakfast. And he actually has gone on record saying that was the most difficult scene he ever directed, to try to figure out everybody's reaction, what their thought process was during, internally during the scene, and how they were going to be sitting and who they were going to be looking at. But yeah, I think that scene to me is the crowning jewel of the movie, because it's where everything comes to a head. It's for people who haven't seen this movie, it's not a vignette thing, where it's different isolated scenes, but it's kind of, you have this kind of little subplot between Loretta's mother and this other guy. And, the fact that again, spoiler alert, that her father's is having an affair, so you have that kind of going on. You have this whole thing with love triangle with Loretta and Ronnie and his brother, going on. And, you have this also friction between Loretta and her father, because she was married once and he doesn't want to pay for another wedding. And like all of these things just kind of get resolved during this breakfast scene. That's, and everybody's there, and and it's all resolved in again, this is where I said it's like so true to at least my experiences. It's all resolved with just a few sentences. It's all very, very quick. Nobody's he comes in, he tells her her that he's got to break off the marriage, and then okay, she yells for a little bit, and then she gets engaged to Ronnie, Nicolas Cage's character. Her father and mother, settle their whole affair thing with just a simple stop seeing her, and he slams his hand on the table and he says, okay, and then that was, it. And that was like, I was like, yeah, that's pretty much, yeah, that's what I remember. Like that's, there's so much going on under the surface with, the eyes and with the expressions and with the tone of voice, that the words are kind of almost secondary just to reinforce. And I just think all the characters did beautifully with that. And it's just such a kind of, it could have been like this huge, volcano that went off with all this stuff going on. But instead, it just feels so warm and kind of like you said, it brings you into the family.
And I feel like you need that scene in particular because it's a very soft yet subtle ending.
Yes.
It really just, it's very intimate the way that this movie ends. And, it throughout the course of this movie, it's so busy, but you need that because it's like, there's like scenes where, Rose's father-in-law is like, he lives at their house, and so like he like walks the dogs and like has like his like own like little like subplot. And then you have Cosmo, who's Rose's husband. He ends up like having this like affair throughout the entire film. And one of the things that like really just like got to me about this movie, I was like, what is the deal with this Italian restaurant that everyone seems to go to where there's always like one couple that the camera fixates on that's like having the best night of their life, and then you have another couple that's like either breaking up or like you're watching a divorce happen right before your eyes. And I liked it the second time that they got it because we got that exchange between Rose and Perry.
Yes.
And I love how that could be one of the best scenes in this movie, I feel like, where he walks her home after being spotted by her father-in-law. But it's just like such an awkward scene. And then they get home to where Rose and Cosmo live, and Perry's talking to her and he's like, what's your husband do? And he's like, oh, he's a plumber. he's like, oh, that must mean, that must be how he affords like such a nice place, has such a beautiful wife, and kind of almost like lives like enviously for a few minutes, because here you have this scene where like Perry, like when we meet him, like he's an older guy, he's a college professor, and he's like dating one of his students, and like he admits to Rose that like he has a habit of it, and he like tries to like make the advance at Rose, and Rose is like, I can't invite you up. And he was like, oh, is it because, you're married? She's like, no, I can't invite you up because the house is empty and I'm home alone, but I know who I am. And it's like that scene right there just kind of like brought a new depth to her character. But I love the fact that, we could have gotten this like very in the moment, just like heated, like very sensual, like one night stand kind of thing. And, she like stood her ground and like fought for her marriage. And I feel like sometimes like that's a thing that's very rare in film. And like even today, I feel like when you're talking about the rate between like marriages that continue versus marriages that end in divorce or like infidelity. So that was like really refreshing for me to kind of see a scene like that in movies.
Yeah, that's honestly, like I said, one of my, aside from like you said, the breakfast, pretty much aside from the scenes with Nicolas Cage, and that moon scene. I mean, that's another one of my favorite scenes that you just listed. That was one of the ones that really stuck with me, long after, the movie. Like, I mean, I remembered it, from any, like up till now, like, and I haven't seen the movie a year. And because it's such, again, like I said, that's what I loved about it. And, not in the script and the way the actors did it with these kind of undercurrents that are there, because like you said, it's such a pivotal scene for, Olympia Dukakis's character, Rose. And it's also, it's because she stands her ground for it, but they also have this connection, but she's not going to use it. She's not going to bring this connection in where it's going to disrupt her marriage. They're kind of just two people having that. And I think he gains even more respect and admiration and affection for her because she, will stand her ground. At least that's how I took the scene. And it's just a beautiful, like I said, scene. And you're right. It could have, like, when I was watching it the first time, I just kind of been like, okay, now she's going to go have her affair. And haha, she got back at her husband, just assume that was where they were going. So it really kind of struck me as, oh, wow, this is something different that you don't normally see, the way they kind of handled that, because he didn't push himself on her, which is, sometimes you see it when the woman, refuses and the guy, tries to push himself on her, and turns out to be a creep. And, it wasn't, though. It's this kind of very beautiful, touching scene where they kind of where he was kind of disappointed because it's this wonderful woman that he knows he can't have. And she's so wonderful because he can't have her. And, she kind of, I think kind of realizes, that her marriage is, more important than kind of the ego of having this, lover, lavish her for like one night. So it was a beautiful scene that really took a lot of depth and showed a lot of depth.
And I love his like response where he's like sad for a second and then he's like, well, we can go to my apartment. Yeah. And it's like, that's the guy thing to do. That's, what a man.
But he relents though. Which he kind of understands. I think he gets a kiss on the cheek as a consolation prize, if I remember correctly.
Yes. And, I think, but her character needed that moment because it's never really alluded to that she knows about this affair until the breakfast scene. And I think that particular date or like dinner, whatever you want to call it, with Perry kind of like awoken something in her where, she had her chance for vengeance. And instead of getting vengeance, she kind of got shaken alive to where she was like, I'm married. I have been for a while, and I'm going to fight for my marriage. And that's what I feel like you need that scene in particular to kind of like not only appreciate Olivia Dukakis's full performance throughout the course of this movie, but also how everything ends up in the end between Cosmo and Rose as their arcs kind of intertwine, and they kind of almost start back at square one with the same as Cher and Ronnie. Yes, which is, like I said, how, the beautiful arcs that they do and how that breakfast scene kind of brings everything together. Because, like I said, the other plot lines, that we have, various plot lines we have going through this movie kind of, they could have gone separately, and the breakfast scene kind of intertwines them and I think contrasts them beautifully. And yeah, I think that's a huge turning point to her character. And immediately after that interaction with Perry, John Mahoney's character, is when she also sees Ronnie's brother, remember, and she has a drink and she says, "Can you tell me why men chase women?" And he gives this kind of, I think, very touching explanation where he references the Bible story of Adam and Eve with the rib, and he says, well, because God took the rib, from man to make woman, there's an empty spot in man that he's always trying to fill, and that's why he is always looking for a woman to fill it. And then I love the scene where then Cosmo comes in, after they have this conversation, and she just says to him, she's like, just so you know, you're going to die eventually, because the whole point was that, like, he's like, well, she says, well, if that's true, like, I mean, why do they have to constantly chase after all these, men? And he's like, well, because they're afraid to die. And so then she kind of tells her husband, she's like, you are going to die, so you don't need to chase after these. Kind of like the subtle way. And he's like, thank you. And then he goes up to bed. And, but then, the next morning is when she kind of flat out says, stop seeing her, which I think is just, like I said, it was a very powerful scene. And, brought that kind of that storyline to a very kind of satisfying close. Well, let's kind of move away from the back end of this movie and kind of like more into. Yeah, we kind of did reverse, didn't we? Yeah. But it's all good. I mean, this ending is just it's kind of like you had said, like the crown jewel of this film, and I love that thematic element that is just constantly spoken throughout. There's just a lot of elements of this movie that are like staples, whereas you don't kind of get that either in modern films or like most films. I feel like you really kind of have to study them to kind of like understand like really the common elements or staples that the filmmaker was going for when he was making this. But here you have family, intimacy, but also you have the repeating motifs of the moon and the infidelity of why men chase women. And I think that scene in particular where Johnny talks about Adam having the rib taken out of him, I think it's that perfectly captures what we're going through as far as stuff like that. And it's just it's captured so eloquently. And but I think that there's a line in here, it says something to the effect of like a full moon makes a woman draws a woman to a man. And that's very refreshing to me, because I feel like we were talking about rom-coms before we started recording, and our undying love of that film genre. We do a whole episode on that, yes. Rom-coms. Don't threaten me with a good time. I'm about it. But this one I feel like is refreshing, because mostly rom-coms, when you're talking about them, it's mostly a man going after a woman, and this one it's definitely Cher pursuing Cage. Like, it's a little bit of that like behind the scenes of like her saying like, this is the guy that should play Ronnie. You definitely get to see that explored in this, and I think that their chemistry together is just incredible. I love that there's like this like unspoken just anger between Ronnie and Johnny. And then when you find out like why that is, it's like I just love the fact that Cher calls him out and she's just basically like, you're a wolf, like, and you losing your hand and your girl and your brother, like all of that happened for a reason. Like you're trying to wake up, so just wake up. And I just love like her boldness and her honesty in that portrayal.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's like why the relationship works, because he is a little crazy, but you know, she calls him out on it, and you know, and I think he appreciates that, because you know, I mean, I think that's what draws him there, because she is, you know, able to kind of see his craziness, but you know, see past it as well, and you know, I think that's, you know, one of the endearing qualities of the relationship. You know, I mean, I love and it's speaking of rom-coms, where this is a little bit different. I mean, it's I guess would be classified as a rom-com, but it doesn't, as much as, like I said, you and I talked before we start recording about how much we both enjoy rom-coms. The standard formula, though, usually is, you know, the guy pursues the woman. Sometimes, you know, it's mutual or something like that, but, you know, and then usually the guy, although sometimes it's the female, but usually the guy does something to screw it up at the end, you know, and they break up or whatever. And, you know, and then he has to go like do something awesomely romantic, you know, the Say Anything with the boombox famous scene and stuff or something like that, you know, to win her heart back and prove how much he loves her and that they're meant to be together. And in this movie, really, that doesn't quite happen. What happens instead is they just have this scene where they go to this opera together, and you know, I think Cher realizes that she's fallen in love with you know, Nicolas Cage's character. Cher's character realizes she's fallen in love with Nicolas Cage's character, and you know, and she tries to go away because she's engaged to, you know, Johnny's character and his brother. And, you know, and he says, look, you know, like the stars are perfect, you know, the snowflakes are perfect, you know, we're not perfect. Love's not perfect. You know, we're just, you know, we're in this right now because this is what's working right now. And, you know, I think that's just such, you know, a powerful scene and testament to love. And, you know, without using the cliches of, this guy's, you know, this guy screwed it up, or this woman screwed it up, or, you know, everyone screws it up. It just kind of flat out says it, hey, we're not perfect. We're going to screw this up. We're going to do stuff. You know, we're not, you know, this isn't working out, you know, as a storybook should, but, you know, it doesn't matter because, you know, it's here and it's where we're at.
Yeah. And I think one of the interesting things about this movie is how well it responded. You know, we live in this world now where, you know, movies are lucky if they make it 4 months in theaters, and this film particularly debuted at number 3 and stayed consecutively in the top 10 grossing films week to week for 20 weeks.
Wow.
Which is incredible. It's an incredible testament. It went on to become the 5th highest grossing movie of the year of 87, I believe. And, you know, there's such a testament. It's now featured in the Criterion Collection, and it's such a testament to the quality of this movie. And I think a large portion of that is the fact that, you know, you're drawn in right from the opening credits. You know, Dean Martin, I think.
The song at the beginning?
Yes.
Yeah, it sounded like him.
Yes, Dean Martin's track, That's Amore. And I feel like when you hear that particular song, like that, to me, just like it makes me kind of like welcomes me in right away to like just feel at home and like with family at that point. And I feel like it just does a really good job at kind of like establishing like this is what you're getting ready to get into.
Yes. And again, a little trivia, actually, they originally had the opera that they go see. I forget the name of the opera that they went to see in the movie. I don't know if you remember because I know you just saw it, but anyway, they originally had the opera music playing underneath that instead of That's Amore. And the test audiences started to squirm because they thought they were watching like an art house film. and so they drop the opera. That's why in the opening thing while they're doing it, you see all this stuff getting ready for the opera because it was supposed to be the opera song underneath it. So they changed it to That's Amore. And I actually think it works better because I think it does exactly what you said it does. It just gives the feel of this movie, this like Italian, like, family oriented, love story that, kind of shows, what it's like to be in love. I mean, I know, Cosmo and Rose are kind of, in the estranged, through most of the movie, but like you said, that scene, that's a beautiful scene where the older couple sees the moon and he smiles at, his wife and, kind of like sees how beautiful she is again, all of a sudden. And, and it's that, that kind of, those kind of instances are all throughout the movie that kind of just make you be like, oh yeah, that's love's a wonderful thing. And I think that's, That's Amore just kind of gives that feel so perfectly of what you're about to see. As far as, just this eccentric Italian family just dealing with love of all kinds.
It was so interesting the way that Nicolas Cage and Cher's characters end up both meeting and finding one another. Basically, we've established that like Nicolas Cage has a wooden hand throughout the course of this film,
right?
And him and like Cher's basically trying to make amends between the brothers so that Johnny or Ronnie will come to the wedding, and he gives this like great speech, this great monologue.
He Nick Cages, it's great.
And then like he like storms out of the frame, and like one of the girls that brought Loretta down just kind of like, I love him so much, and he doesn't even notice it.
Yeah, for her.
But it's like, it's such a weird thing, like such a dynamic that the two of them have in the beginning, because they're like almost at each other's throats, and like she's like analyzing like every last detail of his life and like telling him like why he's like living his life wrong, and like why it's not Ronnie's fault, it's Ronnie's fault. Why it's not Johnny's fault, it's Ronnie's fault actually. It bugs me that the names rhyme so much in this movie.
It's confusing.
But like, she basically like repeats the same exact monologue to Cage that she heard the people in the liquor store say, which I thought was interesting that it kind of came back in the way that it did. But then like there's just this like tonal shift where like he's just like had enough of it, and like he flips over this entire table and just kisses her.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know about you, man, but that was a weird moment in the movie for me. I was like, all right, I guess we hit the pedal to the metal in this one. Like, this is happening. And like, she has like no remorse. And I'm like, it just took this kind of like realistic approach and like just like shoved it out the window to like fast tracked itself.
I'm gonna, like I said, I saw this movie for the first time a year ago, and I got to be honest, I didn't know much going in. I mean, I knew Cher and Nicolas Cage were in it. I didn't know the plot line. I didn't know, who they played. I hadn't really I had ever seen a scene from it to my recollection. So I kind of, and none of this was brought to my attention or told to me, before I was watching. So I was kind of watching it very fresh, and very kind of, I guess like, just kind of, okay, let's just take it as is. But yeah, I mean, that whole, you kind of start off and you're like, okay, I get it. She's kind of, not romantic, she's got this boyfriend that, turns into her fiance, but it's all kind of very, non-passioned and, kind of just very, through the motions. And then, we hit this bakery scene where Nicolas Cage first shows up, and he Nicolas Cages, and I'm like, whoa, okay, like, because he just like, all right, there was no lead up there. We hadn't seen anything kind of that crazy, you know, up until that point. So I didn't kind of expect Nicolas Cage to Nicolas Cage, you know, that early on. And then they, like you said, go up into the apartment, and I'm like, oh, okay, I see where this is going. You know, they're gonna, you know, start dancing around each other. They're gonna do like the rom-com dance, you know, where, you know, they pretend they don't have feelings for each other. They do little flirtations, little smiles, you know, they make each other giggle a little bit, you know, and then he just whips off the table, and I'm expecting her to run out of the apartment, and she's just like, yep, we're gonna do this. I'm like, wow, okay, that was love real quick. Like, but all right, let's do this. We're gonna love at first sight. It happens, you know. When you know, you know.
But I feel like that scene in particular helps make this movie really kind of have a unique identity among other romantic comedies. Because it's not to say that, like, you know, we haven't had romantic comedies where, like, the good girl goes after the bad girl. I mean, like, She's All That is kind of coming to my mind right now. Like, Not Another Teen Movie is another example of that. Granted, it's a spoof, but it still kind of has that plot line in it. And, you know, you kind of get into this, like, you know, I don't know. It just, it escalated really quickly, and then it just kind of stayed there. And I was like, okay, I guess this is kind of where we're going. But it works for this film. I feel like in other films, like if you would have had a scene like that, it could have come off a lot more. I feel like rapey is really the only word I can say. And it kind of would have come off a little bit more in that vein, but just kind of given the chemistry that these two actors have together, the fact that, you know, Ronnie's like, look, if you let me take you to the opera, I'll never bother you again. And then you kind of, you know, get a more gradual sense, because you've kind of seen like what this like love at first sight is like really done to her, where she goes out, she gets her hair done, she gets her makeup done, like she gets a new dress, she completely forgets to take the money to the bank and, you know, to do the books, you know, so she basically is like on cloud nine with this. And, you know, from someone that has been married for 7 years, like, I understand what it's like to, like, you know, flirt with your wife or your significant other and like just kind of like lose track of, you know, either your time or your priorities because of it. And, you know, I think that this film again just definitely captures it really well. And hey, love at first sight, it's possible. Just want to throw that out there.
Yeah, I'm a believer in love at first sight. I think sometimes it doesn't always, you know, happen, but I think sometimes, yeah, two people just meet and it's just, you know, it's something, you know, very, very deep and primal, and you know, they know, and you know, the rest of the relationship is just kind of getting to know what was kind of already known, you know, without any words. So I do think that has happened. And can happen. And I think that's shown here. And I think that's shown, like you said, very beautifully. And it could have come across, like you said, it could have come across forceful. Some of the things Ronnie says, I mean, could be misconstrued as being very, you know, like you said, I mean, rapey, you know, I mean, like when they get back from the opera, he's like, I want you in my bed, get in my bed. Could be construed as he's basically, you know, just wants to, you know, have his way with her. But you know, it's the way, again, that this movie, the magic of this movie and the way they do it and the chemistry between them, I mean, you kind of know that this is, you know, a passionate love at first sight, that she is, like you said, on cloud nine, perfect example, and that his whole world just changed. He just went from being miserable to everything's worthwhile now, in an instant, you know, and that like all the misery before him that he felt, you know, is now worth it. You know, and that he's found, you know, the reason for living, you know, you get from him. And, you know, like I said, she just becomes like, you know, her whole, like, you know, I mean, not that she isn't attractive, in the beginning of the movie before this, but I mean, she just kind of meets him and like she glows. I mean, she just her character just glows for the rest of the film and just becomes all that much more beautiful. And and that's just and the things like that when he like takes her and he throws the table. I mean, it comes across as passion, and that they're both kind of giving into this passion that just they lived their lives without for probably their entire lives up to that point, and that they finally found it and they just give into it. And the same thing when they're after the opera, when he's like, get in my bed. It's kind of, to me at least, how I took it. It wasn't get in my bed because like I want to have sex, but I mean he probably does of course too, but my bed, meaning we belong together. I want to be, I want you with me. I want to be sleeping next to you. I need, we're a pair, and that was kind of the idea, like, don't, walk away from me after we've experienced this love together, so that's how I took it. And I think, like I said, that's what sets it apart from other kind of standard rom-coms where you do this dance, for the hour and a half. And, like I said, I like that dance, and we both say we like that. But, this is kind of a little bit of a different take because it's kind of a rom-com in reverse almost, because that explosion of passion that you usually get at rom-coms at the end when the couple finally, admits to themselves and to each other that they're in love, happens almost instantaneously. And the rest of the movie is kind of them saying, hey, we are in love, so we're just going to have to make it work, even though it's sloppy and it's a mess and, it shouldn't have happened. It happens.
Yeah. And I think passion is definitely a lot better phrasing of that. So I think that's going to do it for us on this episode of the Cage Corner podcast. But real quick before we leave, on our Cage scale, where would this rank from 0 to 5 for you?
I'm going to have to, and as you said before, I am very generous with my ratings. And I'm going to have to give this a 5, just because I really do think it's, it's not, it's not necessarily the Godfather of romantic comedies, but it's, it's definitely, a really deep, heartfelt, funny, very, fun and endearing romantic comedy. Nick Cage and Cher's chemistry are beautiful. I think all the performers did a great job with their portrayals. So I really, again, it maybe isn't, the most, groundbreaking, earth-shattering, movie that's just going to change how you look at the world. But I think it's really gives you a lot to, think about as far as love and passion. And I think it's really, really well executed.
I'm going to go just a little bit lower than you. We're on the same page for this one. I think we both really liked it. This is going to get a 4 out of 5 for me. I really enjoyed this movie. Like I said to my wife, and like I was saying to you before we started, like I feel like this movie, I didn't know what to expect. I read the synopsis on IMDb really quick before I started it, and I really wasn't expecting to like it because, to be honest with you, like the whole like pop star thing we covered at the beginning of this like was a little bit troublesome. Like movies about infidelity, I'm like they could like either swing like one way or the other. But then I think that this one, like, it just kind of hits all the right notes when you're talking about chemistry between the actors, the score, the music, the script, the like all of the intricate moving pieces of this movie, and then how they all culminate in the end, I feel like is just very well done. So, yep, that's going to do it for us here at the Cage Corner podcast on this episode. And where can people find Mr. Matthew Basil online?
Well, I'm on Facebook and Twitter mostly. So you can find me if you search the Conjuring Pen. You can find me on that or on Twitter. And then if you can find me on Facebook, Matthew Mattthew, A, my middle initial, and then Basil, Basile, like the Italian spice, since we're talking about Italian movie, but with an E on the end. And yeah, and there's a lot of Matthew Basils out there, so that's why you gotta look for the A in the middle. And that's on Facebook. So you can find either my writing page on Facebook under that, my name, or The Conjuring Pen as my handle on Twitter.
All right, well, you guys can find our mother show and more information about it at victimsandvillains.net, where you guys will find reviews by both Matthew and myself, also from our other incredible team of writers, past podcasts, and most social media, which include Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and Twitch, and Letterboxd as well. And most importantly, our suicide prevention resources, because at the end of the day, while we love talking about Nicolas Cage, it's not the sole reason we make this content. We make this content so that you listening right now, know that you have value and that you have worth. And Victims and Villains exists to help give you the library of resources and raise awareness of mental health and suicide prevention. So until next time, remember to keep caging. We'll see you guys soon.